He said his dad used to be a boxing legend. His teacher laughed. His classmates laughed. No one believed a quiet boy from a broken neighborhood could come from greatness. But the truth doesn't need applause to exist. And on the day she mocked him loudest, a man walked in that made the room fall silent. What would you do if the person you laughed at had the power to humble a room with just one name? It was supposed to be just another boring Wednesday morning at Westgate Elementary. The gym was packed tight for the monthly assembly, kids fidgeting in plastic chairs, teachers half listening with coffee mugs in hand. The topic was our family heroes. One by one, kids walked up to the MIC and shared stories about firefighters, nurses, and grandparents who survived wars. Then came Jordan. Small for his age, with oversized shoes and quiet eyes, he walked slowly to the MIC gripping a folded sheet of paper. The room buzzed with whispers. He cleared his throat, then said it. My dad was a boxer. A champion. He once trained with the greats, even sparred with Adonis. A long pause followed. Some students giggled. And then, Miss Caldwell, his homeroom teacher, chuckled into her MIC and leaned forward like she was about to give the class a comedy skit. Adonis. From the movies? She asked, loud enough for the gym to hear. The kids burst into laughter. Jordan stood frozen. Let me guess, she added. Next you'll tell us your dad trained Rocky too. Another roar of laughter. One teacher chuckled quietly into her hand. Jordan's shoulders slumped. But he didn't walk away. He said again, it's true. Miss Caldwell tilted her head and said, Sweetheart, your dad works night shifts and lives in an apartment above a laundromat. Boxing legends don't come from there. The laughter turned into something cruel. A boy near the front shouted, Tell us more, champ. Jordan's cheeks flushed red, but he didn't cry. He just stood there. The moment should have ended there, but Miss Caldwell took it further. She pulled out her phone and recorded him as he stood silent. This is gold, she whispered to another teacher. Gonna share this with the staff chat. She captioned the video. Kid says his dad trained Creed face with tears of joy and hit send. What no one realized was that a very specific person, one they never expected, would eventually see that message. And when he did, everything changed. Jordan had always known his dad was different. Not just because he looked stronger than the other dads, or because he had a scar that curved down from his temple like a question mark. Marcus didn't speak much about his past, but Jordan saw flashes of it when they walked through their neighborhood. Men nodded with quiet respect. Older folks whispered his name with a tone that hovered between pride and regret. That's Marcus the Machine, one gas station clerk had once muttered, not realizing Jordan was in earshot. Should have been a world champ. At home, their life was modest. A one-bedroom apartment where Jordan slept on the pull-out couch and Marcus worked nights at a shipping warehouse. They had little, but Marcus made sure Jordan never felt poor. Every morning started with push-ups and affirmations. Don't let where you are decide who you are, he'd say. Jordan believed it. At least, he wanted to. Their living room walls were bare. No photos of Marcus in gloves. No trophies. No newspaper clippings. Just a calendar, a clock, and a single framed quote that read, A quiet man holds the loudest truths. Jordan asked about his dad's boxing days often, but Marcus always replied with the same calm sentence, that was another life. Still, the clues were there. Calloused knuckles. Lightning-fast reflexes when a glass ever dropped. The way his eyes changed when a fight came on TV. Once, late at night, Jordan snuck into a storage box under the bed. Inside, wrapped in an old towel, was a dusty gym pass with Marcus's face beside the Creed boxing logo. Next to it was a pair of red gloves, signed not by his father, but by Adonis Creed himself. That was all the proof Jordan needed. That, and the stories Marcus would tell in bits and pieces when he thought his son was half asleep. Stories of gyms that smelled like blood and chalk, of 12-round wars and whispers of a title shot that never came. But the stories always ended the same way. Then I left, Marcus would say. Sometimes walking away takes more strength than staying. At school, Jordan wasn't exactly popular. He was the quiet kid, always in oversized hand-me-downs, always sketching boxers in the corners of his notebooks. The other boys teased him for his silence, for his weird lunches, for the way he never had both parents at school events. But nothing got to them more than his stories. When he'd proudly say his dad once trained with the best, they'd laugh and ask why he wasn't rich. Why they never saw him on YouTube. Jordan didn't care. He knew who his dad was. Or at least, he thought he did. Every time he asked Marcus why he quit, why he walked away, Marcus would look out the window and simply say, "I made a choice." It was that choice that haunted everything. Because deep down, Jordan wondered what that choice really was. Did his dad lose a big fight? Was he hurt? Or was it something worse? Still, Jordan never let doubt cloud his belief. He carried his dad's name with pride, even if the world didn't. He defended him when the other kids mocked. He wore old gym shirts with pride. His father may not have worn a crown, but in Jordan's eyes, he was the greatest to ever lace up gloves. What Jordan didn't know was that Marcus had made a silent promise years ago, to never return to that world, no matter who asked. The fights, the fame, the injuries, the betrayal, it was all buried deep. Until that day at school, when a single moment of humiliation, recorded and spread like wildfire, would drag those buried memories to the surface. And while Jordan stood alone in that gym, ashamed and unsure, the man who had walked away from the ring was already beginning to feel the echoes pulling him back in. The week after the assembly felt like slow torture for Jordan. Kids whispered behind his back in the hallway and made exaggerated boxing moves when he walked by. Some even printed out screenshots of his frozen, awkward face from the video Miss Caldwell had recorded and taped them to lockers. "Future champ," they wrote in red marker, laughing as they passed him. But what hurt most wasn't the students. It was that an adult, his own teacher, had started it. Miss Caldwell didn't stop at recording the clip. She sent it to the staff group chat, not knowing one of the substitute gym instructors happened to be a part-time trainer who had once interned at the Creed Foundation. The moment he saw the video and the boy's name, something clicked. He didn't laugh. He froze. The kid's face. The name. The confidence behind his claim. He recognized it. He quietly forwarded the video to an old contact who worked at the foundation in Los Angeles. That person, out of curiosity, showed it to someone else. Word started to move through the ranks. It didn't take long before the clip reached someone high up, someone who recognized the name Marcus. Not many people knocked Adonis Creed down during a sparring session. But Marcus did. And there was video proof locked in a private vault at Creed's personal gym. So when Creed himself saw the video, he didn't laugh. He stared at it, his jaw slowly tightening. Not because the boy was wrong, but because the world around him had forgotten a name they should have remembered. The next day, Creed made a phone call. The next hour, someone reached out to Westgate Elementary. Meanwhile, at school, things got worse. Miss Caldwell doubled down, telling Jordan during recess to stop living in a fantasy world. She told him if he couldn't provide proof of his dad's boxing career, he'd be removed from the Family Hero Project altogether. She even went to the principal with her complaint, saying Jordan was being disruptive with his delusions. Jordan didn't argue. He just stared at her, confused and heartbroken. That night at dinner, he sat across from his dad, silent. Marcus noticed. He wasn't the emotional type, but something about his son's face that night made him put his fork down. Jordan looked up and quietly asked, "Was it all real?" Marcus didn't answer right away. Then, without saying a word, he got up and walked to the closet. From behind the winter coats, he pulled out a worn showbox. Inside was a faded Polaroid, two men in boxing gloves, one of them unmistakably young Adonis Creed. And standing across from him, fist raised, was Marcus. Jordan held it like treasure. Still, he didn't bring it to school. Something told him the picture wouldn't change minds. The next day, when he entered class, the mood felt different. There were whispers, but they weren't mocking. Teachers kept checking their phones. Miss Caldwell was unusually quiet. Around lunchtime, an announcement came over the speaker. All students and faculty are to report to the gym at 1 p.m. sharp for a special guest appearance. The buzz began immediately. Some thought it was a local politician. Others said it was a singer. Miss Caldwell strutted around, convinced it was someone sent to honor her for her years of teaching excellence. Jordan said nothing. But deep in his chest, something was stirring. Back in the administrative office, the principal had just opened a sleek black envelope hand-delivered by a courier. Inside was a gold-stamped card bearing the logo of the Creed Boxing Foundation. It was an official request for a guest speaking slot, featuring none other than Adonis Creed himself. No press. No media. Just him. There was also a note, "Let's remind people what legends look like." The principal blinked at the card for a long time. Meanwhile, Marcus was standing in his living room staring at his phone, where a single message had appeared. "Time to lace up. Your kid's gonna need you there." Marcus didn't smile. He didn't speak. He simply opened the closet, pulled out a black jacket, and reached for a pair of old boxing shoes that hadn't touched a gym floor in over a decade. The air in the gym buzzed with curiosity. Students filed in, eyes darting around, whispering theories about the surprise guest. The bleachers were packed, teachers lined the walls, and a few even held their phones ready. Miss Caldwell stood near the front, smiling with a self-satisfied look, her hair freshly curled and a special lanyard around her neck, as if she expected an award. Jordan sat quietly in the second row, staring at the stage with no clue what was coming. Then the lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room. The gym doors opened slowly, and a tall man stepped inside. Students squinted, not recognizing him right away. But as he stepped into the light, a ripple of gasps moved across the crowd like a wave. There was no mistaking the man who had played Adonis Creed, Michael B. Jordan. He wasn't acting this time. He walked in with quiet confidence, flanked by two men in suits who scanned the crowd. Everyone stood. Some clapped. Others pulled out their phones. But Michael didn't smile or wave. He walked straight to the microphone, removed his sunglasses, and looked out over the stunned room. He cleared his throat, waited for silence, and said, "Today I came to talk about something important. Respect." His voice was calm but full of weight. He continued, "There's a young man in this room who reminded me that we sometimes forget where greatness really comes from. It doesn't always wear gold chains or live in mansions. Sometimes it works 2 jobs and keeps its trophies in a showbox." The room was frozen. Miss Caldwell's smile faltered. Jordan sat frozen in place, his heart pounding so loud he could barely hear. Michael went on, telling a story of the early days of his career. How he trained for the Creed films. How the foundation found real boxers to spar with. And how one man had humbled him during a practice round. "I'd done 3 rounds with national champs and pro fighters. But only one man ever dropped me clean," he said. His name was Marcus. The room snapped to attention. Every head turned toward Jordan. "Yeah," Michael said, looking directly at Jordan, "that's your dad." The gym went quiet for a second too long. Then the side doors opened again. Marcus stepped into the light. He wasn't in a flashy suit. Just his black jacket and old boxing shoes, the same ones he once wore in the ring. His face was calm, unreadable, but his eyes locked on Jordan's. The boy looked like he might fall over. Every single student turned in their seat. Miss Caldwell took a small step back, the color draining from her face. Michael pointed to Marcus. "This man right here didn't just spar with me. He taught me something I never forgot. Real strength doesn't need a crowd to cheer it on." The crowd began to murmur, teachers now unsure of how to react. Miss Caldwell tried to interrupt, walking toward the MIC, but Michael turned toward her. "I've heard enough from you," he said, not unkindly but firmly. She stopped mid-step, frozen by the sharp edge in his voice. Michael then invited Jordan to come join them on stage. The boy walked slowly, knees shaking, but with each step he stood a little taller. When he reached the stage, Marcus put a hand on his son's shoulder. It wasn't flashy or over the top. It was quiet, steady, unshakable. Then Michael handed Jordan the MIC. The boy looked out into the sea of faces that had mocked him a week ago. For a second, he didn't say anything. Then he said, "I told you." It wasn't loud, but it hit like a hammer. The room erupted, not with laughter, but with cheers and applause echoing off the gym walls. Some teachers clapped. Others just sat stunned. Miss Caldwell quietly backed away from the spotlight, her eyes darting to the exits. As the moment unfolded, the principal took the stage, trying to salvage professionalism by welcoming Michael officially. But no one was listening. All eyes were on Marcus and his son, standing side by side. Jordan had gone from being laughed at to being lifted up, not because of fame, but because of truth. A truth no one believed until it stood in front of them, undeniable and proud. Marcus hadn't wanted to return to that world. But watching his son be mocked for believing in him changed everything. He didn't come back for glory. He came back for his boy. And while the world now looked at Jordan differently, the only thing that mattered to the boy was the quiet squeeze of his dad's hand, saying without words, "You were right to believe in me." The gym had returned to a hum, but it wasn't the same kind of noise as before. It wasn't laughter, or gossip, or casual side talk. It was the sound of a crowd trying to make sense of what they'd just seen. Kids who used to mock Jordan now looked at him like he was a walking legend. Teachers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to clap or stay silent. And standing right in the middle of it all was Marcus, who hadn't said a word yet. But the way he carried himself, calm, solid, unmoved, said more than any speech could. Michael turned back to the MAC and said, "There's something else you all need to know. Something no one ever talks about. This man standing here, he didn't walk away from boxing because he wasn't good enough. He walked away for reasons that deserve more respect than most people can handle." The room hushed again. Even Miss Caldwell had stopped fidgeting. Michael continued, "Years ago, Marcus had a title shot lined up. He was the #1 contender. People in the industry knew he was the real deal. But 1 week before that fight, something happened that made him choose between two things, his future or his son's life." Michael paused. Everyone leaned in closer. Jordan was just a baby when he got really sick. The kind of sick where you don't know if the doctors can fix it. The night Marcus was supposed to be on a flight to Vegas for a fight that would change his life, he was in a hospital room holding his son's hand. The air turned heavy. Jordan slowly turned to look up at his dad, his eyes wide. Marcus finally stepped forward. He took the MIC from Michael, cleared his throat, and looked out at the room filled with people who'd never known his story. "I didn't need the world to know who I was," he said. "I just needed my son to grow up knowing I stayed." You could hear a pin drop. Even the loudest students were frozen in silence. Boxing was my dream. But being there for my son, that was my choice. And I'd make that same choice again, every time. Jordan stood at his father's side, blinking fast to hold back the tears. He had heard pieces of the story, but not like this. Never with the full weight. Never with the sacrifice spelled out so clearly. Michael leaned toward the MIC again and added, "Before I left today, I dug up an old video from the gym archives. Something no one has seen before." He pulled out his phone and nodded to a technician near the stage. A projector lit up behind them. The screen showed a young Adonis Creed in the ring, fast and sharp, trading punches with a taller, leaner man. The footage was grainy, but when the camera zoomed in, you could see it. Marcus landing a clean shot that knocked Creed off balance, sending him to the mat. Gasps filled the gym. "That was my first knockdown," Michael said. "It's not in any highlight reel. No one posted it. But I kept it, because I knew someday I'd need to remember who taught me what it meant to get up again." Miss Caldwell stepped forward, pale, her voice shaky. "I didn't know," she said. "I thought he was," but Marcus cut her off with a single look, calm but final. "You didn't ask," he said. She stepped back like she'd been hit. The principal moved to the MIC next, clearly rattled. "On behalf of the school, we want to deeply apologize to both Jordan and Mr. Marcus for what they've been through. This assembly was meant to inspire, but we've all learned a lesson ourselves today." He looked toward Jordan and added, "Sometimes, the quietest people carry the loudest truth." As applause filled the room, a different kind of energy swept over the students. It wasn't just excitement, it was respect. Real, honest respect. Jordan had gone from being mocked to standing in front of the whole school with living proof of everything he said. But the biggest change wasn't around him, it was within him. He no longer felt small. He no longer second-guessed his story. Because now the whole world had seen it. Not just the fists or the footwork, but the heart. The kind of heart that walks away from fame to stay beside a child who needs him. Marcus never chased a title, but that day, in that gym, he wore something better than a belt. He wore the pride of a son who saw everything clearly now. And in that clarity, something powerful was born. The assembly didn't end with fireworks or music. It ended with a silence so full that it felt louder than any applause. Michael shook Marcus's hand, gave Jordan a quick hug, and left through the same doors he entered. The students stayed seated longer than expected, unsure if they were supposed to go or just sit and process what had happened. Some still held their phones in their hands, but none were recording now. There was a strange feeling in the air, one of realization. That moment shifted something in everyone who had witnessed it. It wasn't just about boxing or fame anymore. It was about truth. About what it means to be great even when no one's watching. After the crowd started to leave, Jordan walked beside his father down the hall, past the lockers that had once been covered in cruel jokes. The printed photos had been torn down. No one whispered as they passed anymore. One of the same boys who had laughed the hardest during the first assembly now looked at Jordan and nodded. He didn't say a word, but the look said everything. Jordan held his head high, not out of pride, but because for the first time, he felt seen. Not just by the school, but by his father in a way he never had before. They stepped out into the afternoon light, and Marcus finally spoke. "Are you proud of me, Dad?" Jordan asked, his voice quiet but clear. Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked down at his son, nodded once, and said, "You stood tall when it mattered. That's what being a fighter means." Jordan smiled wider than he had in months. There was no need to talk about what would happen next. No need to wonder if the internet would pick up the story, or if people outside the school would hear about the moment. What mattered had already happened. Respect had been restored. And a bond between a father and son had deepened in a way words couldn't touch. The principal offered Marcus a position as the new school boxing coach, funded through a partnership with the Creed Foundation. At first, Marcus hesitated. Returning to a gym was one thing, but becoming a teacher was another. But after a moment, he agreed. He saw it not as a job but as a way to give back. To show kids like Jordan that strength isn't just in the fists. It's in knowing who you are even when others don't believe you. On his first day, Marcus brought with him an old punching bag, a few worn gloves, and that same quote that had always hung in their living room, "A quiet man holds the loudest truths." He pinned it on the gym wall, above the mats where he would soon teach kids about balance, respect, and resilience. Miss Caldwell was reassigned. Officially, the district called it a role transition. Unofficially, everyone knew it was the fallout of what she'd done. Her final words to Jordan were awkward and shallow. She tried to apologize, but the damage had already been done. Jordan didn't reply. He didn't have to. Her discomfort was its own kind of justice. He had something she didn't, dignity. And he wasn't about to waste it on bitterness. The students, once cruel, slowly began to admire him. Not because he had a famous dad, but because he never gave up on the truth. In the weeks that followed, he became a quiet leader. The kind of kid others looked to when things felt uncertain. As time passed, no newspapers ran the story. No news crew came to film a follow-up. But within that small town, something had changed forever. A forgotten fighter had stepped out of the shadows. A boy had become brave enough to speak his truth. And a community had been reminded that greatness doesn't always shine under lights. Sometimes it waits quietly, patiently, until the right moment to stand. What's left unsaid is what lingered most. Why did Marcus keep his past hidden for so long? Why didn't he step forward sooner, before the mockery? Only he knew. And maybe that was the point. Maybe some stories aren't told for the world's sake, but for one person's belief. In the end, the ring may have gone quiet, but the legacy lived on, in every push-up, every jab, every young kid who walked into that gym believing they mattered. And for Jordan, the real victory wasn't proving them wrong. It was learning that believing in someone, even when no one else does, is the strongest punch you'll ever throw.